Well, welcome everybody. Today I have an absolute legend with me on the show. I have Rod Dixon, one of my heroes from way back in the day. Rod, welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you on Pushing the Limits. Thanks for taking the time.
Lisa, thank you. And I mean, of course, I've known about you and read about you, but this is our first time, and it's come about through the pandemic. So
yeah,
some good things have come out of it.
There's definitely some good things come out of it, and I've definitely known about you sort of pretty much since I was a little kid. So you're one of my heroes back in the day. So it was like, oh wow! And the funny thing is, we got to meet through a friend in America who just happened to know you, and I was talking with them, and they're like, and I'm like, can you introduce me? It's like via America we've come, but together, two Kiwis. So wonderful to have you on the show, Rod. Rod, you don't hardly need an introduction. I think people know sort of your amazing achievements as an athlete and runner are many, and we're going to get into them. I think one of the biggest, most incredible things was winning the 1983 New York City Marathon, and that iconic image of you with your hands in the air going, and the guy behind you, not such good shape. That's one of the most famous images there is. But Rod, can you tell us a little bit about your story, where you came from? How did you know that you were such a good runner? Give us a bit of background on your early years.
Well, I think, Lisa, it started. I was born in Nelson and living out at Stoke, which is just not far out. And my brother John, 3 years older, he went to Stoke Primary School, and so I was in the sandpit, I think.
Yep.
And my mother came out to check on me. And that's all right, young Rodney's, he's in the sandpit. I'll go and take my shower now. And that was my chance to then put all the things that I'd learned of how to climb over the gate. And I climbed over the gate and off I went.
Oh,
and,
no.
My mother got the phone call from the Stoke school. Where is your son, Rodney? He said, he's out the back playing in the sand. And she's, no, well, he's down here at the Stoke school with his brother.
He's
gosh. Because we used to walk John down to school and go and meet him to walk him back. And so I knew the way. And here was my chance. So I think, Lisa, it started when I was 4 years old. When I
were escaping.
Ran down.
And your brother John, I mean, he was a very talented, amazing runner as well, and actually got into it, before you did. Yes. Tell us a little bit of his story, because he was definitely has been a big part of your career as well. Tell us about John a little bit.
Yeah, well, my mother's family were from Motueka. They're all farmers. Unfortunately, they were tobacco farmers and hop gardens,
yep.
And sheep and cattle. And so we would be over with the family a lot of the time. And of course, a big farm. And John would always say, let's go down and catch some eels, or let's go and chase the rabbits. And so we were outside running around all the time. And I think, then we used to have running races, and John would say, well, you have 10 yards or 20 yards, 50 yards, and see if you can beat me down to the swing bridge. And I would try, and of course he'd catch me. And so there was always this incredible activity between us.
Yeah.
And my dad was a very good runner too. And so we would go down when in Nelson, we would go down to the Tahunanui Beach for a swim. Pretty well most nights we could walk and run down there. So we would all run down, and then we would run along the beach to the estuary and run back again. And my dad, of course, he would stride out and just make sure that we knew our pecking order.
Yes.
But slowly but surely, you see, John waited for his moment where he beat Dad. And I think Dad turned around and came back to me and he said, I won't run with John, I'll just run with you. So I knew what the story was, that I had to do the same, but it took me another couple of years before I could beat my dad. But so running was very much an expression, very much part of us. We'd run to school, we'd run home. I would deliver the newspapers in the neighborhood. Most of the time I would run with that. And then at 12 years old, I was able to join the running club, the Nelson Amateur Athletic Harrier and Cycling Club. There's 300 or 400 in the club, and it was just incredible because it was like another extension of the family.
Yep.
And so we would run on farms and golf courses and at the beach or at the local school, or sometimes the golf club would let us run on the golf club. So it was this running club. So the love of running was very, very part of my life. Yeah.
And you had a heck of a good genetics by the sound of it. You were just telling me a story, how your dad had actually cycled back in the 40s, was this? Around Australia, something like 30,000 miles or something. Yes. Incredible. Yeah. Like, wow, that's and on those bikes in those days.
Yes.
And what an incredible, so he was obviously a very talented sports person.
Yes, I think he was more of an adventurer.
Yes.
We've got these amazing pictures of him with his, well, of course, in those days, they had to wear knee-high leather boots.
Yeah.
And, jobbers like Dr. Livingstone.
Wow.
Gosh. And so he was exploring and traveling around Australia, and just his diaries are incredible, what he did, where he went, and everything was on the bike, everything.
Wow.
So it was quite amazing, that endurance. I think you're right, Lisa.
He had it. He had it in there.
Incredible thing, and genetically. And my mother was she played basketball, and she was very athletic herself, and gymnast. So I think a lot of that all came together for us kids.
So you definitely had a good Kiwi kid upbringing, and also some very, very good genetics. I mean, you don't get to the level that you have with my genetics, I can tell you that much. We're just comparing notes before, and like how we're opposite ends of the running scale, but both love running, and both have learned. So Rod, I want to dive in now into a little bit of some of your major achievements that you had along the way, and what your training philosophies were, the mentors that you had. Did you follow Arthur Lydiard's style of training? Who were you? So take me forward a little bit in time now to when you're really getting into the serious stuff. What was your training structure and stuff like back in the day?
Well, it's very interesting, Lisa, because in fact, Arthur Lydiard did, in fact, incredibly. He was working with Rothmans, and he would travel the country, and he would come to the running clubs to teach the coaches, to impart his principles and philosophy with the coaches. And my brother, being 3 years older, I think he tended to connect with that more so than us younger kids.
Mm-hmm.
But we were just pretty impressed. And Bill Bailey used to come. He was a salesperson. He would come, and we'd all go out for runs with Bill, and he would tell stories, and we were fascinated by that and encouraged by it and inspired by it.
Wow.
So I think what John did is we started to John would get 17, 18, 19, and he noticed that young Rodney was starting to our three favorite words, Lisa, is learn by doing.
Yep.
So I would learn from this race, and I would adopt something different. I wouldn't try. John would tell me, he said, you've run the same race twice expecting a different result. He said, you've got to run differently.
Wow.
And then I would go out training with John, and then he would say, okay, now you turn around and go back home because we're going on for another hour.
Wow.
And so he knew how to brother me, how to look after me.
Wow, what an awesome
brother.
And
and so really it was, as I started to come through, John realized that maybe Rodney's got more talent and ability than I do. So he started to put more effort into my training and balance. And that didn't really come till I was about 18. So he allowed those 5-6 years just for club running, doing the races, cross country. I loved cross country, and the more mud and the more fences and the more steep hills, the better I ran. And so that cross country running, I used to love running the beach races through the sand dunes. And I love track. I was fascinated with running on the grass tracks because of Peter Snell and Murray Hilberg, and also too fascinated with the books like The Kings of Distance, and of course Jack Lovelock winning in 1936. And one of the first things I wanted to do was to go down to Timaru Boys High School and hug the oak tree that was still growing there, 80 years old now, Lisa.
Wow.
Because they all got a little oak sapling and that is growing still growing at Timaru Boys High School.
Wow,
so
isn't that special?
There's a lot of energy from all around me that inspired me, and I think that's what I decided then that I was going to take on the training. John asked me, and I said yes, and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I just listened to the 1968 Olympics on my transistor radio," which I tell kids that was Wi-Fi, I mean wireless. And I said, I want to go to the Olympics one day. And he said, "Right, well, you've made the commitment." Now, obviously, during the training, I would say John would say, "Well, hold on, you took 2 days off there. What's going on?" I said, "Oh, wow." He said, "Well, that's okay." He said, "You set a goal, but we've got I've told you how to do it. So you've got to figure out what you're prepared to do." And I think then I realized it was in my decision making, and I had to focus. So there was very, very few days that I didn't, comply, not so much comply, but I was said, "Hey, my goal and my Everest is this. And this is what it's going to take."
And that would have been 1972.
No, 1968.
1968. Okay.
69 was when I really put the focus on.
Yep.
Then we set the goal, what it would take. And really by 1970 and 71, I made my very first world cross country tour. Wow. And I think we're finishing 10th in the world when I was just 20.
Wow.
I think we realized that, that goal of the Olympics next 2 years' time is not unreasonable.
Yeah.
And so we started to think about the Olympics, and that became the goal on the bedroom wall. And I remember I put pictures of Peter Snell and Ron Clark and Jim Ryan and Kit Kaino on my wall as my inspiration.
As your visualization technique, as I'd call that now, your vision board and all that. And this was really the heyday of athletics in New Zealand, really. I mean, you had some, or in the 70s at least, some other big names in the sport, Did that help you, I don't think it's ever been repeated, really, the levels that we sort of reached in those years, eh?
No, it's certainly, yes, because there was Kevin Ross from Wanganui. He was the 800 meter, 1500. Then there was Dick Taylor, of course, who went on incredibly in 1974 at the Commonwealth Games. But Dick Quacks, Tony Polhill, John Walker wasn't on the scene till about 73.
Right.
But here at these, and I remember I went to Wanganui to run the 1500, and just as a 21-year-old, and I beat Tony Polhill, who had won the British Championships the year before. Wow. So we suddenly, realized that
you're world class.
Foot it with these guys. I can, but of course, there were races where I would be right out the back door, and we would sit down and we said, "Now, was it tactics, or was it something we weren't doing in training, or was it something we overdid in training?" And we just had to work that out. I mean, it was very, very feeling based in those days. So
and very early in the knowledge, like now we have everything is, really, I mean, even when I started doing ultra marathons, I didn't know anything, like I didn't even know what a bloody electrolyte tablet was, or that you had to go to the gym at all. I just ran and I ran slow and I ran long. And back then, I mean, you did have some, Arthur Lydiard's approach, what's your take on that now? Like looking back on the knowledge that we have now that, that those sort of high mileage training styles, and what's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, John realized, of course, Arthur was very much the 100-mile a week.
Yeah.
And John realized that in the terrain, and I said, I don't want to run on the road, John. I just don't like running. He said, okay, so then we'll adapt that principle because you like to run on the country and the hills all around Nelson.
Yep.
And so we adapted, and I think I was best around about 85 miles.
Wow.
Doing the conditioning. There would be some weeks there where I would go to 100 because it was long and slow. And we would go out with the other runners, and the talk test showed us how we were doing. It's at 17, I was allowed to run the Abel Tasman National Park. And of course, the track was quite challenging in those days. It wasn't a walkway like it is now. And so you couldn't run fast.
Yep.
And that was the principle behind bringing us all over there to run long and slow, and just to get the time in rather than the miles in.
I like that approach, the time. I still use it.
Go more with time.
Yeah.
And
time on feet.
And then Arthur would come to Nelson, and he would give John time. And John would, of course, I would have to write everything down in my diary, and John would have the diaries there, and he would sit with Arthur, and Arthur would go through them, and Arthur would give a big tick. He'd say, I like that, I like this, I like this, I like this, so you're doing this.
Awesome.
And because it was still the basic principles of the pyramid, where the base is the foundation training, and as you go towards your competitive peak, you're starting to narrow it down and do shorter, faster anaerobic work, and with based on, and John, we just set straight away, you don't improve when you train, you improve when you recover.
Wow. So wise back then.
We learned recovery and rest and recovery, and
you're listening, athletes out there. You don't get better in training alone. You need the rest and recovery, because it's still the hardest sell. That's still the hardest sell for athletes today, is to get them to prioritize their recovery, their sleep, all of those sort of aspects of it, eh? And like you already knew that back then, so
And it was once again, just remember too, learn by doing.
Yep.
So so unless you're going to record what you've learned today, you're not going to be able to refer to that. Sometimes John would say, "Oh, I noticed today that you didn't do this and this and this. Bring your diary over." And in those days, of course, it was a blackboard and of chalk, and he would write the titles at the top, and then from my diary, he would take out and he'd put under those headings. And then we'd stand back and say, now look at this. There's 3 on this one, 9 on this one, 2 on this one, 6 on that one.
Yep.
And we want to try and bring the lows up and the highs down. Let's get more consistency, because this is your conditioning period. We don't need to have these spikes. We don't need to have this roller coaster. I want to keep it as steady as we can, because it's a 8-10 week foundation period.
Wow.
So those were the ways that we used to be able to, and John just simply said, he would say, when you wake up in the morning, take your heart rate or take your pulse for 15 seconds.
Yep.
And write it down. And then he would say, look, he said, the work we did yesterday and the day before, he said, I noticed that there's a bit of a spike in your recovery on Tuesday and Wednesday. So instead of coming to the track tonight, just go out for a long, slow run.
Wow. And this was before apps and heart rate monitors and goodness knows what we've got available to us now to track everything. So what an incredible person John must have been like, because he also gave up pretty much his potential to,
Yeah.
didn't really to help you foster your potential, because you obviously genetically had like an extreme gift. That's a pretty big sacrifice, really, isn't it?
He was incredible, and I just saw him yesterday actually, and he used to live in the Marlborough Sounds, and of course now they've moved back to Nelson, and so it's wonderful. I mean, I would always go down there and see him, and I used to love. Well, I wouldn't run around, but I was biking around all around the Marlborough Sounds, Kenepuru Sounds,
Wow.
Pelora Sounds, and I'd do 4 or 5 hour bike rides, and he'd say to me, he says, "Now, what was your big thing?" And I said, "Well, I saw 3 cars today, John, in 3 hours." And he said, "Oh, yes." And I said, "And 2 of those were in the driveway."
Gosh,
So it was just amazing. I just loved it down there. And but now he's back here. We see each other and talk, and we go for our bike rides, and we go for a little jiggle jog, as we call it now.
And so he helped you hone and tailor all of this, and really, give you that guidance so that you built your really strong foundation. So what was your very first big thing that you did? Was it would you say that's the Olympics? And
well, I think going qualifying, well, not qualifying, but making the New Zealand cross-country team, the world cross-country team in 1971. I think that was the defining moment of what we were doing was, wow, this is amazing. And so, as I said, 71, I finished 10th in the world. And then John said, "Well, what are you actually thinking for the Olympics? Are you thinking the steeplechase or the 5,000 meters?" And I said, "No, the 1,500.
Wow.
"Why?" And I said, "Well, Jack Lovelock, Peter Snell, John Davies." And he said, "Good." He said, "You're committed, so let's do it."
Okay.
And of course, it was once I'd announced that, then of course I got all the not the criticism, but the suggestions from all the runners. Well, I think Rod's a bit optimistic about the 1,500. He hasn't even broken 150 for the 800 meters. He hasn't even broken 4 minutes for a mile. He wants to go to the Olympics, and I think he should be thinking. And John said, "Put the earmuffs on. Don't listen.
Good advice.
Keep focused.
Don't listen to the naysayers."
And off we go. And then slowly but surely, I was able to get a lot of races against, Dick Quacks and Tony Powell and Kevin Ross and that. And then I remember in Wellington at Lower Hutt, I was able to break the 4-minute mile.
Wow.
Then I got very close in a race to the Olympic qualifying time. And then, of course, the Olympic qualifications. And a lot of those runners didn't want, they already realized that they hadn't got anywhere near it. So they didn't turn up for the trials. So John gave up any idea of him going to the Olympics. And he said, "I'm coming to Auckland to pace you. And this time you will stay right behind me. And when I move over and say go, go."
Wow.
And so that, because we'd done a couple of these earlier in the season, and I sort of thought, "Oh no, I can sprint later." And of course I missed out on the time.
Yeah.
But this was it. And so he said, "Our goal is for you to win the trials and to break the qualification." And he made it happen. Lisa, he ran within 1 second of every lap to get me to 300 meters to go. When he moved over and he said, "Go," I got the fright of my life and took off.
You wouldn't dare not after that dedication, would you? And you qualified. You
won the trials and qualified. Wow. And Tony Polhill had qualified in his and he had won the national championship. So he qualified, won the nationals, and now I'd qualified and won the trials. So they took us both. And that was incredible. He was an A grade athlete. I was a B grade athlete. A, you got everything paid for. B, you had to pay.
Yes, I know that one. Yeah. And so then you got to actually go to the Olympics. Now, what was that experience like? Because a lot of people, not many people in the world actually get to go to an Olympics.
Yes.
What's it like? What's it like?
Well, it was pretty. They're very again. So we went to Scandinavia and to Europe to do some training and in those days we used to say, well, no, you got to acclimatize. You know, you
Yeah.
don't. I mean, nowadays you can kind of go and run within a few days, but in my day it was 3 to 4 weeks. You wanted to have.
Well, and that's ideal, to be honest. Still,
Yeah,
I reckon.
exactly.
Yeah.
They were right.
Yeah, they get that time and, like that whole jet lag shift and the
Yes.
changing of the time zones and all of that sort of stuff takes a lot longer than people think to actually work out of the body. Okay. So now you're at the Olympics.
So here we were, but so and John gave me a written or typed up schedule every day, and this with the training, and he had balanced it knowing that I was going to be flying from London to Aarhus or to Denmark, and then we were going to go to Sweden, and then we were going to go to Düsseldorf, and so he factored in all the traveling, all the changes, and really a lot of it was I was able to go out there and pretty well stay with that.
Yep.
Now and again, I realized that wasn't going to work, but what he had taught me, I was able to make an adjustment and use my feeling-based instinct, saying, what would John say to this? John would say this, because all that journey we'd had together, I'd learned very, very much to communicate with him. Any doubts, we would talk, we would sit down and we would go over things. So he had trained me for this very moment to make decisions for myself. Incredible.
Oh, he's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he sounds like, that's incredible. I'm just sort of picturing, someone doing all that, especially back then, when you didn't have all the professional, team coaches running around you and massage therapists, goodness knows whatever else that, the guys have now, guys and girls.
But he also too, Lisa, he knew that I would respond. It would take me 4 to 5 races before I started to hit my plateau.
Wow.
I found early in those days that, I was a strength trainer to get my speed. I came across a lot of athletes who had speed to get their strength.
Uh-huh.
And so what I found that when I would run against the speed to strength, they would come out of the gate, first race, and boom, hit their
peak
time.
Wow.
Whereas I would take 3, 4, 5 races to get my flow going, and then I would start to do my rhythm was here, and then all of a sudden, then I would start to climb my Everest.
Wow.
I then knew, and so John said, "These are the races that the Olympic Committee have given us. I want you to run 3,000 meters on this race. I want you to run 800 meters if you can on this race. If you can't run 800, see if you can get 1,000. I don't want you running a 1,500 just yet." And so he would get me under, over, under, and then by the time that 3, 4 races, now it's time for you to run a couple of 1,500s and a mile if you can.
Wow.
Then I want you to go back to running a 3,000 meters, or I want you to go back out and training.
Wow, so really specific.
He was very unbelievable. But really also too, at that time, I had these 3 amazing marathon runners: Dave McKenzie, our Boston Marathon winner; Jack Foster, who is the absolute legend of our running; and a guy called Terry Manners. And John said to me, "Don't train with quacks and all those other guys. Do your runs with the marathon runners."
Wow.
And and they would take me out for a long, slow run.
Yep.
Whereas if you went out with the others, you would get all this group of runners.
Yep.
You'd all be racing each other.
Yeah. Don't race in your training.
Yeah, ego, the ego and with the pecking order,
Yeah.
Whereas when you ran with the marathon runners, there was no pecking order.
Yeah, it's all about pacing
and of course, and I would eat with them too, because I learned how to eat, because they were better eaters than the other guy.
Wow.
They would eat more carbohydrate and more organic foods, because it was the long run that they would eat. So I learned to do that. It was interesting because Jack pointed out to me, said, now you see those two guys that were at the track today, and they were doing, and you were quite overwhelmed because they were your competitors and they were doing this incredible workout.
Yep.
And I said to them, I said, whoa, that's what I'm up against.
Yeah.
And Jack said, put it behind you. I want you to come to the dining room with us tonight, and we'll try and see if we can sit with them or near them. And sure enough, they were over there.
Yeah.
And they were talking, and they were pushing their food all around their plate, and they weren't eating much. And
wow.
Jack said, now look at you, you've eaten everything and you're going back for seconds and thirds.
Wow.
He said, if they're not replacing their glycogen, they won't be able to run very well in a couple of days because they're not eating right.
Yep.
So that gave me the confidence, I'm eating better than them, so they may have trained better. And sure enough, you didn't see them at the track, and the coach had taken them off because they were obviously racing too hard. So they were racing their training and not recovering.
Yeah, so don't be intimidated, because it's very easy, isn't it, when you start to doubt your own methods and your own strategies, and have I done it right, and so-and-so's got it better than me, and they're more talented, and this is, all of that negative self-talk, and you found a couple of guys to go, well, hang on, you got this part better than they've got. What a great sort of mentoring thing for them to have done, to put you in that sort of good headspace. On the headspace thing, how did you deal with the doubts? Did you ever have like lots of self-doubts? I mean, I know certainly I did, still do, where you don't feel good enough, like, what am I doing here? The old imposter syndrome type thing. Did that ever rear its head in your world, or were you able to focus?
No, absolutely, Lisa. I mean, I would often, unfortunately, I could go to John with any question. There was nothing, no stone left unturned. He was amazing because he sensed it too, by the way, being that brother thing and training. And he was very, very connected with me because he would train with me and he would sense things. And he would say to me, he said, oh, you're a little bit down today, aren't you? And he said, what's happened? Oh, well, a bit of bullying going on in school and this or that, or that girl won't talk to me anymore and I love her, and
all that stuff.
And so he was like, and Marion, my mother, she was very, very on to me too, and she would sit with me and talk with me, and her mother, my grandmother, was amazing people. And
wonderful.
And I just right now, when my mother was 95 years old, she asked me to come and sit with her on her birthday, and she held my hand and she said, you can call me Marion from now on. And I said, wow, this is fantastic. And that was my mother's gift to me, because I would always call her mother. I never called her mum.
Really?
No, it was always mother. And that relationship with my mother was very, very powerful. And it came through in my running. And John would now and again have to, kind of toughen me up a little bit.
Yep.
But it was an incredible balance. So I never had anything that I took to bed with me. I never had anything that I would go.
Get it all out. And gosh,
and John would say sometimes if you're running through, the Dun Mountain or tree, and he said, I know what you get yourself a bit wound up. He said, stop, take your shoes off, and hug a tree.
Wow.
And then hug a tree.
So, these guys are just so like, what astounds me is that your mum, your brother, these good mentors and coaches that you had were so advanced. And this is the stuff we're talking about now, like I'm telling my athletes to take your shoes off and go and ground yourself every day and go and hug a tree and get out in the sunlight and get away from the screens and do, like all these basic sort of things. But back then there wasn't that, like there wasn't all this knowledge that we have now. And they obviously innately just nurtured. It sounds
Yes.
like you had the perfect nurturing environment to become the best version of yourself.
Yes, I think so, Lisa. I was very, very, and wonderfully, even in the club, in our running club, the coaches. Now, here, get this. Our chairman of our running club was Harold Nelson, 1948 Olympian.
Wow.
Our club captain was Kerry Williams, 5 times Australasian cross-country champion.
Yeah.
And
Next
they
level.
took time to run with us kids. They didn't all go out and race. The club captain and Harold would come down and talk with us kids, and we would run. And then I remember Kerry Williams when he took us for a run, and he said, right. He said, now there's a barbed wire fence there and there's a gate. And he said, we've got the flag there and the flag there. He said, you've got a choice of going over the barbed wire fence or over the gate. He said, come on, you boys, off you go. And of course, 9 out of 10 went over the gate. And a friend of mine, Rod Dixon, and I, we went over the barbed wire. And they said, why did you do that? And I said, because it was shorter. And he said, and he turned to the others and he said, I like their thinking. And he said, you've got to have, to jump over a barbed wire fence, you've got to have 100%, you've got to have 90% confidence and 10% ability.
Yeah.
And I said,
and a lot of commitment. And that's what is a good, that's a good analogy
all
for
little
everything.
things like that all started to, it was this big jigsaw puzzle, and all those pieces started to make sense, and I could start to build that picture. And when I started to see the picture coming, I understood what they were telling me. And once again, learn by doing. Oh, another thing that John had above my bed was a sign, don't be influenced by others.
Wow, that's a good piece of advice for life. I think I might stick that on my Instagram today. Rod Dixon says.
Don't be influenced by others. And,
yeah.
And of course, wonderfully, all this I've carried on, and with my program that I did with the LA Marathon, and bringing people from the couch to the finish line, I was going through. We were putting through. I started off with about 500 or 600, but I got up to over 2,000 people.
Wow.
And basically, it's the mantra that I use for my kids program is finishing is winning.
Finishing is winning.
Slow and steady. The tortoise won the race.
Well, that's definitely been my bloody life history, that's for sure. Finishing is winning, and the tortoise wins the race. Yeah, if you go long enough and everyone else is sort of stop somewhere and you're still going. That was my sort of philosophy. If I just keep running longer than everybody else, I might have a chance. Let's go now, because and I'm aware of time and everything, and there's just so much to unpack here. I want to talk about the New York City Marathon, because that was pretty. I mean, so you did the Olympics. So let's finish that story first, because you got the bronze medal at the 1500 at the Olympics. Now, what was that like? A massive, life-changing thing to get an Olympic medal?
Oh well,
I mean, you did it 4 times, but that first one.
I mean, my goal, I remember it, and I've still got the handwritten, the written notes of John, and our goal was to get to the start line at the first heat, and if you can qualify for the next thing, this is it. Yeah. You're there. This is what we've worked for, and of course I remember in 1968 again, when I'm listening to my transistor radio to the 1,500 meters, where Kino and Jim Ryan, the world record holder, Kip Kino, of course, Commonwealth champion from Edinburgh in 1970. And here was this incredible race, and we were absolutely going, listening to it, and it was incredible. And to think, Lisa, that 4 years later, I'm on the start line, and beside me is Kip Kino.
Yeah, you'd be like,
champion.
This is pretty amazing. Yeah.
And then the next runner to come and stand beside me was Jim Ryan.
Wow.
The world record holder. And here I am, and I'm thinking, of course, I'd already figured out, when we got the heats, I go, well, you've got the world record holder, silver medalist, and you've got the Olympic gold medalist in my race, and only 2 go through to the next round.
Oh man.
So I'm
Talk about
thinking,
hard heat.
I'm going for it. But I wasn't overwhelmed by that,
Wow.
because, John had said to me, our goal is, and I wanted to please John by meeting our goal, at least get to the next round.
Yeah.
Well, history will show that, Jim Ryan was tripped up and foul, and I finished second behind Kino to go through to the next round.
Wow.
And then of course I won my semi-final, so I was in the final.
Wow.
And this
Amazing.
was unbelievable. It was
Must
no
be
doubt
like
about
pinching yourself and what was
Yeah.
this for real? I'm at the finals in the Olympics.
Yes.
And you ended up third on that race,
Yeah.
on the podium with a
Yeah.
medal around your neck on your first attempt.
Yeah.
And in a distance where the people said you're not
Yeah.
really suited to this,
No.
Rod. Yeah.
And of course, what was amazing is that just after we got the medal and went back to the track, and Arthur Lydiard came into the room to congratulate me, and to Bill Bailey, and they said, he said, you realise that you broke Peter Snell's New Zealand record, and and it was almost like, oh my God, I didn't mean to do that.
Apologizing for breaking the record. Oh my goodness. I'm sure that that's just epic. And then you went on to more Olympic glory. Tell us from there what happened.
Well, so at that stage we went back to the New Zealand team were invited to the Crystal Palace in London for what they called the international athletes meet, and it was a full house, 40,000 people, and I came up, and I didn't want to run the 1500. Well, they didn't actually have a 1500. They had a 3,000 or 2 mile. That's right, we had a 2 mile, and that's what I wanted to run, the 2 mile, and I was and that was Steve Prefontaine, the American record holder, and who just finished 4th at the Olympics. And I went out and we had a great race, unbelievable race. I won it, setting a Commonwealth and New Zealand record. He set the American record. Wow. And that was just like, now it was just beginning to think, wow, I can actually run further than the 1500.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, and you certainly did.
Yeah. So we got invited to go back to Europe in '73. And so we had the we called the Pacific Conference Games in '73 in Toronto. So I asked the athletic people, can I use my ticket to Toronto and then on to London, because I have to buy it, and they allowed me to use that ticket. And then Dick Quacks and Tony Powell said they were going to do the same. And then we had this young guy call me, and John Walker, and he said, I hear you guys are going to England, and could I come with you? And I said, yeah, because he didn't go to the Olympics, but he'd run some great races. We saw what was happening with this kid.
Yeah.
And he said, now, do you get me the ticket? And I said, no, you have to get the ticket. And he said, oh, how do I do that? And I said, can't you afford it? And he said, oh, not really. I said, have you got a car? He said, yes. I said, well, sell it. And he said, really? So he did. And my reasoning is that, John, if you run well enough, you'll get your tickets back again, which means you'll be able to buy your car back again. And that was John's
Put your
incentive.
ass on the line for what you want. And that's a because this is all amateur sport back in the day.
Totally.
Did you, it was hard going, like to be a world-class athlete while trying to make a living. And, how did you manage all of that? Like, financially, how the heck did you do it?
Well, before I left in '73, I worked full time, 8 hours a day. I did a milk run at night. I worked in a menswear store on a Friday night. And then, of course, fortunately, I was able to communicate with Pekka Vasa from Finland, and he said, we can get you tickets. So the thing is that get as many tickets as you can, and then you can cash them in.
Right.
So then, so you get the ticket. Of course, there was you wouldn't get the full face of the ticket because you were cashing it in. But if you got enough to get around
To get
and
it
travel,
to the next event.
and you did get expenses under
Yep.
the IAAF and those rules. You were able to get per diem, what they call per diem.
Yep.
But by the time you came back, you kind of hopefully you were equal. You weren't in debt.
Yeah.
So then you go back, and I remember
Crazy.
actually for the 72 Olympics, a very good friend of mine allowed us to go deer shooting, and we would go out every weekend and then sell the venison.
Yep.
And that was, giving another $100 a weekend into the kitty.
Into the kit. And this is what you do, like to sacrifice. I must admit, like when I represented New Zealand, so I did 24-hour racing, and at the ripe old age of 42, finally qualifying after 8 years of temps. And I qualified as a B athlete. I did 193.4 in 24 hours, and I had to get to the 200. I didn't make the 200, but hey, I qualified. And then we didn't even get a singlet, and the annoying thing in my case was that we qualified for the world champs, but they wouldn't let us go to the world champs. And I've been trying for this for 8 years before I could actually, qualified.
Wow.
And I was desperate to go to the world champs. And then just on the day that the entries had to be in at the world champs, the athletics, New Zealand Athletics said, yes, you can actually go. And I'm like, well, where am I going to pull $10,000 out of my back pocket, on the day of closing, so I didn't get to go to the world champs, which was really disappointing. So I only got to go to the Commonwealth champs in England, and got to represent my country at least, because that had been my dream since I was a little wee girl, watching you guys do your thing. And my dad had always been, you have to represent your country in something. So, get your act together. And I failed on everything, and I failed and I failed and I failed. And I was a gymnast as a kid. And it took me till I was 42 years old to actually do that, and but I had, we had to buy our own singlet. We had to design our own singlets. We didn't even, get that. And that was disappointing, and this is way later, obviously. This is only, 2010, 9, 10, somewhere. Can't remember the exact date.
Wow.
And so it's still the same, like you're in a sport that has no money. So to be able to to become a professional at it, I managed to do that for a number of years because I got really good at marketing.
Yes.
And doing, whatever needed to be done, making documentaries, doing whatever to get to the races. So like, even though I was like, a generation behind you guys, really, it's still the same for a lot of sports, it's still a hard, rough road, and you're having to work full time and do all this planning.
Yeah.
So, but a good life lessons in a way, when you have to work really hard to get there, and then you don't take it for granted. Now, Rod, I really want to talk about the New York City Marathon, because they're probably like, wow. How the heck did you have such a versatile career from running track and running these, short distances at super high speeds, to then being able to contemplate even doing a marathon distance? I mean, the opposite ends of the scale, really. How did that transition happen?
Yeah, I think, from 73, 74, I realized, the John Walkers and then Philbert Baye and some of these guys were coming through from the 800,000 meters. And so I knew at that stage it was probably a good idea for me to be thinking of the 5,000 meters.
Yeah.
So that was my goal in 75, was to run 3 or 4 5,000 meters, but still keep my hand in the 1,500.
Wow.
Because that was the speed that was required for 5,000.
Okay.
You realize that when I moved to 5,000, I was definitely the fastest miler amongst them. And that gave me a lot of confidence, but it didn't give me that security to think that they can't do it too.
Yep.
So I kept running, the 800s, the 1,500s as much as I could, then up to 3,000 meters, then up to 5, then back to 3,000, 1,500 as much as I can. And that worked in 75. So then we knew that program. I came back to John with the whole synopsis, and then we planned for 76 5,000 meters at the Montreal Olympics. Pretty well everything went well. I got viral pneumonia 3 weeks before the Olympics.
Oh my gosh.
I haven't talked about this very
Didn't
much.
realize that.
It just took the edge off me.
Oh,
And
heck yeah.
of course,
Takes longer than 3 weeks to get over pneumonia.
No, it doesn't. No. And and I was full of antibiotics, of course.
Oh,
and,
God.
It might have been 4 weeks, but certainly I was coming right, but not quite.
Yeah.
So the Olympics 76 was a disappointment.
Yep.
Finishing fourth. I think less than a second behind the first. And
it's
then
pretty bloody good for someone who had pneumonia previously.
And then I went on back to Europe, and then from that point on, I didn't lose a race. I beat all the, and in fact, in 76, I won the British 1500 meter.
Wow.
Sebastian Coe and Moorcroft and Frank Kimmon and those guys. So I focused, everything really on the next couple of years. I'm going to go back to cross country, and I'm going to go back to the Olympics in 1980 in Moscow. This is going to be the goal. And as you know, Lisa, New Zealand joined the boycott, and we were actually in Philadelphia on our way to the Olympics when our media guy came up to John Walker and I and said, "Isn't it disappointing you're not going to the Olympics?" And I look at John and go,
What the hell are you talking about?
No, and we don't. New Zealand had joined the boycott. So at that stage, they said, look, we've still got Europe. We can still go on. We can still race. And I said, well, I'm not going to Europe. I'm not going to go to Europe and run races against the people who are going to go to the Olympics. There's nothing in that for me.
Yep.
And I said, I heard there's a road race here in Philadelphia next weekend. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to go and run that road race, and then I'll probably go back to New Zealand.
Wow.
Well, I went out and I finished third in that road race against Bill Rogers, the four-time Boston and four-time New York Marathon winner, and a guy called Gary Finelli, who was one of the top runners. And I thought, wow, I can do this. This is something I can do. And so I called John, and we started to talk about it. And he said, well, you really don't have to do much different to what you've been doing. You've already got your base. You already understand your training pyramid. He says, you've got to go back and do those periodization training.
Yep.
You've got to, and stay with your, maybe if you don't want to do, you still got to do your track, your anaerobic work. And he said, and then just stepping up to 10,000 meters is not really that difficult for you. So I started experimenting, and sure enough, it was starting to come. And in those days, of course, you could call every day and go through with stuff with John. I had a fax machine, fax things through. And then slowly but surely, I started to get the confidence that I could run, 15K. And then I would run a few 10 milers, and I was winning those. And then I would run a few races, which, it was a bit too much downhill for me. I'm not good on downhill, so I'll keep away from those.
Wow.
So I would start to select. And then I started to select the races which were very high ranked, so A grade races. And then I put in some B grade races and some C. So I balanced them all around so that I was not racing every weekend.
Yep.
And then I started to get a pattern going. And then, of course, I was able to move up to, as I said, 10 mile. And I thought, no, I'm going to give this half marathon a go. So I ran the half marathon. I got a good sense from that. And then I think at the end of that first year, I came back ranked number 1 in road racing.
Wow.
And so then I knew what to do for the next year. And then I worked with the Pepsi Cola company, and they used to have the Pepsi 10K races all around the country. And so I said, I'd like to run some of these for you and do the PR and the media. And that took me away from the limelight races.
Yep.
And so I would go and do media and talk to the runners and run with the runners and then race and win that. And I got funding for that. I got paid for that because I was under contract.
Yep.
And so I was then able to pick out the key races for the rest of the season. And then slowly but surely in 82, when I ran the Philadelphia Half Marathon and set the world record. And that's when I knew, when I
Amazing.
finished, and I said, now, if I turn around, could you do that again? And I said, yes.
Wow.
I didn't tell anybody because that would be a little bit too,
Yeah.
So I just had to make an honest assessment myself. And when I talked to John, he said, how? And I said, yes, I could have. And he said, well, then we're going to look at a marathon.
Some work to do.
Yeah. But he said, what we will do in 1982, you're going to come back and you're going to run the Pasta Marathon in Auckland. And that was going to be my trial. And Jack Foster was trying to be the first 50-year-old to break 2:20.
Wow.
So I got alongside Jack and I said, now this is my first marathon. What do I do? And he said, I see all these runners going out there and warming up. And I don't want to run 29 miles. I only want to run 20.
Exactly, like for the marathon, you don't need to do some extra miles warming up.
And Jack said, use the first mile as a warm-up. Just run with me. I said, that'll do me.
Yep.
So I went out and ran with Jack. And then I remember we started down to Oroaka and we were going through Newmarket. And he said, I think it's time for you to get up there with the leaders. He said, you're looking at people on the sidewalk, you're chatting away as if it's a Sunday run.
Yeah.
He said, off you go.
Yeah.
And I said, you really? And he said, yeah, go. And so I said, all right, because this is Jack Foster.
You can't leave him.
Medalist, 1974 at 42 years old.
Wow.
Jack said, you can climb Mount Everest. I would do it.
Yeah. You're here.
So I got up with the leaders and joined them and out to Mission Bay, and on my way back, and I was running with Kevin Ryan, actually, who is also one of our legend marathon runners. And Kevin, he said, we're in a group of about 4 or 5, and he came out, he said, get your ass out of here. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're running too easy. Get your ass out of here. Make your break now. Yep. So I said, yes, Kevin.
Yes, sir, I'm off.
So I ran, won that. And then that was, when I talked with John, that was going to be the guidelines that maybe not another one this year, but certainly look at 83 as running a marathon at some point.
How did you work the pacing, like going from such a shorter distances and then, going into these super long distances where your pacing and your fueling and all that sort of thing comes into it? Was it a big mind shift for you? Like not to just sprint out of the gate, like you would in a, say, 1500. That the strategies are so very different for something like this.
Certainly those memories of running with the marathon boys in 72, and I went back to Dave McKenzie and Jack Foster and talked to them about what it takes. Yep. And then John, my brother John, was also too very, very in tune with them, and he knew all the boys. And so we started to talk about how it would be. And he said, so what do I want you to do? I want you to go back to doing those long Abel Tasman runs. I want you to do those long aerobic runs, and just long and slow. And they said, I don't want you going out there with your mates and racing it. I want you to just lay that foundation again. Yep. And he said, you've already done it. He said, it's just a natural progression for you. Wow. So it was just amazing because it just felt comfortable. And at that time I was living in Reading, Pennsylvania, and I would be running all out through the Amish country and the farmland roads, they're just horse and carts, no car.
Awesome.
And, I had this fabulous forest, Noldy Forest, which is state forest, and I could run in there for 3 hours and I'd just cross, but I wouldn't run the same trails. Wow. I mean, you'd run clockwise or anti-clockwise, so, just, and it was, and then, but I still kept that track mentality and still did my training aerobically and but what I didn't do it on the track. Fortunately, this forest they had a road that was always closed off only for emergencies, and it was about a 3-mile road. And so I asked if I could put little pin markers with some tape, and I knew that that was 200, 400, 600, 800, and I would do my anaerobic work in a straight line.
There. Yep.
Not pulling to the track, pulling,
Yeah.
And then I would do the odd time trial at the track, but that was only maybe once a month I would do any track work. And if I wanted to do a 2x1 mile, I'd do 1 mile counterclock and 1 mile clockwise.
Yep.
And I could run within about 10 seconds either way.
Wow, so you really got your pacing down. And then, and when did you set your sights on doing the New York Marathon?
Well, it was interesting, Lisa, because in '82, I actually went to the World Cross Country, and I realized that. See, I ran 71, 73, 1980. And I realized that, you know, if I was going to run marathons, I'd get back to my cross country mentality.
Yep.
So I went to the World Cross Country in '82 in Rome, and I remember we always to sit around, and Fred LeBeau, the legend of New York City, of course he had heard about my marathon in New Zealand, and he said it's time for you to run New York. I said, I don't think so, because Boston, London, and San Francisco all wanted me to run a marathon there.
Wow.
So I wanted to go and have a look at the course. So Chris Brasher brought me into London. I had a look at the course. I quite liked the course in London. I didn't. San Francisco was fascinating because I loved the hills, but I didn't like the downhill. So,
yeah.
No,
there was no go there.
And Boston was too much downhill from Heartbreak.
Yep.
So really, I looked at New York, and I thought New York was going to be probably my best marathon course. I had to connect to it emotionally, physically, spiritually, and mentally. So it was ticking all those boxes for me.
Wow.
So at '82 at the World Cross Country, I said to Fred, look, Fred, I will commit to running New York, but it won't be this year because I've got 40 more races this year. But I will look at 1983, and if I run one, I'm pretty sure it'll be New York.
Yep.
And he said, well, how do I put that all together? And I said, all right, I'll tell you what, Fred, if I medal here at the World Cross Country, if I get first, second, or third, I will run the New York Marathon. And I thought to myself, I'm just saying that. Wow. I mean, I'm coming into the finish chute third. And, you know, we're coming into the finish chute, and there's somebody standing right in the middle of the finish chute. And I thought, what the hell were you doing? And as I got closer, it was Fred.
He's saying, you're coming, eh?
Yeah. And I said, it'll be 1983, Fred. So I made the commitment to him then.
Wow.
But I said, I will come to New York Marathon in '82 and watch.
Yep.
And get a feeling of what it's all about. And of course, and that was when Gomez and Salazar had this unbelievable race, and right down to the finish line. And I remember I went out and ran in Central Park the next morning, Monday morning, and I came across the finish line, and I stood there, and of course it was still there, but it was like 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I look up and I go, this is me. I can see myself here.
You're visualizing getting yourself ready.
And it was funny because I actually, you know what Arnold, we always say Arnold, and I stood there and I go, I'll be back.
I'll be back. And you were definitely back. So the following year, you spend this year preparing solely for New York?
Yeah, so I came back to New Zealand, and I did a few what they call, I think it was called the Pasta series of races. We did a few road races, and that was but mainly to come back to New Zealand for summer training and preparation. And then when I went back, I said, by this stage I had my whole schedule, and this was the first time in my life, Lisa, that I actually had a program designed for one race.
One race, yeah.
And that was going to be. Now, these races here in between were part of that journey.
Yep.
There's
just build up races.
Over and under races. And so, and John said, if you're going to be serious about this, you've got to train.
Yep.
No distractions. You focus. And what was incredible is when I committed to that first day, I felt, and as I'd been hugely influenced by Sir Edmund Hillary in my life, and set the Mount Everest, the
camp, that's your camp, base camps.
Yeah, and so here I was now for the first time in my life, kind of like blinkers on,
tunnel vision, one thing. You got to get up this mountain.
Running and writing that diary every day. And it didn't become obsessive, but it became very, very much my goal orientation.
Yep.
And what I could see each month is that I was going up the mountain. I was climbing up. I wasn't having those fallbacks.
Wow.
And it just kept going. And the blocks were, building that.
Oh, you must have incredible genetics, man. It's like, yeah. And you've got a decade or more of actual base behind you now, and experience and at racing at this high level, and everything was sort of coming together.
It was incredible. And the time trials. And I remember I said to my brother John, I called him up and I said, you've got a 3,000 meter time trial for me here, but I said I want to run the mile. And he said, what's your reasoning? And I said, I don't know, John, everything is right, everything is done. I've done everything. I've got all the ticks, everything, all the ducks are in a row. And he said, so what's the draw? And I said, I don't know. It just goes back to 72, I guess. It goes back to the magic of the mile. Mm-hmm. It goes back to Snell. It goes back to Bannister. It goes back to Lovelock. I said, it's all part of my journey.
Yep.
And he said, good boy, go out and run that mile.
Yep.
So I went down to the local high school track. I had my mate come with me. And I said, I will warm up. And when I'm ready, I will let you know. And you click the watch. Don't give me splits. I'm just going to go out there and run feeling based. And I said, I'll come back. And I said, don't call out the time. I will come to you. And that's when you tell me the time.
Yep.
I went out there and I did everything as I would have done in the 70s. And I came and I ran and I felt just right. And I came across the line. And of course, I came over to him and I said, he said, what do you think you ran? I said, I ran very close to 4:1, 4:2. I think maybe, yeah. And he said, how about 3:58.7?
Wow.
And I just said, that's it. Nothing else to be done.
Sub 4 minute and you're preparing for a marathon. So that's just insane. So we're going to have to wrap up in a few minutes. So we're going to get to the actual bloody, the day of the race. And, I was reading one of your articles and you were talking about, you didn't go in the, the elite athletes limos that they put on and you went in the public transport. What was all that about?
Well, I all those years where you'd with the runners you compete, and very few of them eyeball you, and you think, what's with this tension? It's only a race. It's not the end of life.
Good attitude.
So I thought, and I remember because I went to the expo and I saw the enthusiasm and I saw everything going on, and I just was fascinated by all these people. This is my first marathon, really international marathon.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated. And Fred said, well, then the limo will pick you up. And I said, no, I'm going out on the bus. He said, oh, you can't go on the bus. I said, I'm going. And I did. And I loved it because there were coffee drinkers and bagel eaters and donut eaters. And they all had stories.
On the way to the marathon.
I had the hood up and I just listened to this and I laughed all the way out.
And they had no idea who was sitting next to them, really. That's classic.
Yeah.
And so did you do that to protect your mindset, really? So that you didn't see the other guys, or just because you wanted to be one of the crew? And
I thought this is about me. It's not about anybody else.
Yeah, that's a good lesson for everything, guys. Just block out everybody else and do your thing. set your and so now you're at the start line of the New York Marathon. How did the day go? We know the outcome, but
Well, there again,
spoiler alert.
of course, I actually set my time at my goal of 2 hours and 9 minutes.
Yep.
And so I
For
wrote
me. I
that
just
because
can't.
didn't have any time. I didn't have watches or anything in those. And so I did my 5-mile split, my 10-mile split, my 13-mile split, my 18-mile split, and my 23-mile split. So those were my splits, and that's what I kind of wanted to go through.
Wow.
And it was once again, Lisa, don't be influenced by others.
Yes.
So I went out there running my race within a race.
Perfect.
And I stayed with these splits, and it was amazing. The first 5 mile, I went through within 2 seconds.
Wow, you've had such
10 mile,
expertise now at this. Yeah.
10 miles, I was 2 seconds under. It was just,
Wow.
and of course, you look down there and you look at the clock and you go, whoa. So you're getting the shot of adrenaline every time. These
you're
things
hitting your mark. Yeah.
Now the leaders were ahead of me.
Yep.
But I had the blinker. I didn't.
You didn't care.
No. Once again, don't be influenced by others.
Yep.
Run your race.
Oh, this is such gold lessons you're sharing here.
So it was just amazing, and that's how it just progressed. And of course, coming off the Verrazano Bridge onto First Avenue, and the roar of the crowd was just incredible. I mean, every hair on my body stood up. It was so exciting.
Yes.
And so I could see the leaders up, and I was slowly catching some of them. And then of course, I knew where the leader was because of the lead car with the flashing lights. So I couldn't quite see him, but I could see where he was.
Mm-hmm.
And people were calling out, "Oh, you're 2 minutes behind." And I go, "That's not 2 minutes."
No.
But "Oh, you're only 20 seconds behind," so you can't be influenced by them.
No, don't listen to them.
Once again, back to my goals. And then I remember at about 20 miles, I came around the corner, and it started to rain now.
Oh, wow. And
I created 3 pair of shoes, a very slick shoe, an intermediate, and a full wet weather shoe. And I went for the intermediate, not believing it was going to rain as hard.
Yep.
What was happening is when it starts to rain in New York City, the oil is on the road.
Very slick, yeah.
Quite slick. And the white lines are even more. It was like ice. So I had to be very careful where I was going. And of course, you'd see the road and you'd be running and you'd get in a bit of a pothole and you'd go down. And so I had to be very careful. And I came around one corner and I just slipped a little bit and I felt my hamstring twinge.
Oh.
So I had to slow down, shorten my stride, and wonderfully I was able to just do some acupressure. And a couple of times I didn't quite get it, but I got one where you could feel the whole release.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh.
That was lucky.
Yeah.
It doesn't usually happen. You're usually like struggling for, like,
So, and then of course at that point, 20 to 23, there are little short roads. And of course, I'd come around the corner looking up and there's nothing there. So out of sight, out of mind, and then I'd come around another corner and I'd just see them and they'd go around the corner. And then once we got into Central Park, it was a bit more open and I could start to see him.
You could see where he was.
Yeah. And then
were you in second place at this point?
Yes, I was now into second.
Wow.
And now I'm not very good at math. I wasn't good at math. It's at school. At school, I got 23%. And the teacher said he gave me 3% because I spelt my name right. But what I do understand is that I'm getting the times and where he is and the miles, and I think I'm going to run out of distance.
Yeah.
I'm catching him at 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So
and he's 20 seconds ahead.
Yeah, he's got to slow down. And I thought, well, I can't really rely on him slowing down. So what else can I do? And I thought to myself, I've got to start running the shortest route. I've got to start running my tangents better
Yeah,
than I
yeah,
am
yeah.
now.
Yep.
And the good thing is, what I did see is that he was still, in those days, they had the blue line for the marathon, was in the middle of the road.
Right.
And he was
He
running
was
in the
running
middle
the
of the
blue
road.
line. Wow.
So I realized that I might have another 30, 40 corners. And if I could pick him up 1 or 2 seconds,
1 meters, 2 meters. Yep.
there's the 80, there's the minute behind.
Wow.
So don't try and go any faster. Stay within your rhythm. Don't think anything more than just running the tangents and running and staying within your ability. And then slowly but surely another corner, and I could see us catching him.
Wow.
Slowly, and then there's a bit of a rise up to Columbus Circle, and I noticed he was in the middle of the road, which is the apex of, and I
Yep.
stayed low.
Uh-huh.
And then I sat down low and I pumped my arms more, shortened my stride, and leaned
Wow.
more into it.
Gosh.
So I didn't look like a runner, I looked like a mountaineer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I got up into Columbus Circle and into the park, and here he was. He was only 100 yards ahead of me.
Wow.
And so then I realized, I wonder if he is actually waiting for me to catch him before he speeds up. So I realized he was still in the middle of the road, and here was this nice turn, the right turn. I went down through the apex, and as soon as I got along his peripheral, I went as hard as I could.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that he got the shock.
You got the shock because you were like just suddenly and powerfully going past him.
Yes. And he wasn't looking around either, too.
Right.
Okay? I mean, the motor racing, they have side mirrors so they can see what's going on behind.
Yeah, yeah, you guys can't.
Now and again, I would always go around the corner and just glance back. I want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
I don't want, so he wasn't looking around. He wasn't running the tangents. So I realized that these are pluses for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's a game of plus and minus. So.
Gosh. And you were just like I love this mentality of like, what can I do in this situation where I cannot go faster? What can I do to stay? Because a lot of people would break at that point. Like, he's 100 meters ahead of me. I've only got this. I'm not going to make it, and you got that negative self-talk going. And obviously you're like, what can I do here? Yes. So your brain obviously goes to, where's the around the obstacle solution here? What can I do? That's brilliant.
Well, I learned all that in my road racing. I knew that sometimes you just can't run away from people, but you can find out their vulnerable moment. And when they would come into a hill, they would hesitate because they look at the hill. And that's when you try and get 5 or 6 yards from them while they're trying to figure out.
Yeah, yeah.
And you do those things. And then so I would always, if I got 100 yards or 50 yards on a runner, I'd say, right, now settle back down again. You got that quite easy. I'm going to make, I did that, and I spent 20% of my energy to get that. I'm going to make you spend 80% to get it back.
Wow.
So I'd let them come back up to me, and then I would go again, and that would mentally
bust them.
So I was able to play with things. And
that's gold.
And when sometimes I would be running and I would say, okay, I'm going to run this. They're expecting me to run this tangent, but I'm not going to do that, because that tangent takes you up a little bit of a hill. I'm going to go a little bit longer around here, but it's not as steep. So I can maintain the speed better rather than slowing down to speed
you're
up.
the master at strategy, eh?
Some of these runners would come with me, and then I'd go back and they'd come with me. And I realized they're doing exactly what I want them to do. They're running my race.
Yeah, yeah.
You're not going to be at my race.
Yeah, because you've got this all sussed for your particular set of talents and skills. And so coming down that last bit there where, you've got him in your sights now, what was that feeling like? Did you have that feeling, I'm going to do this, I've got this guy? And did you break him as you went past him?
Well, I think what I knew that everything I'd been thinking and doing and planning or running got me to this point. Now I've got to kind of shock him or give him something that. And in fact, if you watch the tape, when I do go past it, he threw his head back.
Yeah.
Now I didn't see that, but I sensed there was he got a fright.
Yeah.
And so of course the next turn it's 150 meters.
Yeah.
But I was running
psychologically
broken
someone.
Is he going to come back for me? But I just had a slight glance as we did the right turn, and I could see that, and I saw the finish line. I said, he's not going to get me between here and there.
Wow.
And of course, I'm full of adrenaline.
Yes.
That this is amazing.
You're just overcome, and he's got that psychological brokenness of seeing you fly past when he's led the race the whole way. That's harsh. That's harsh.
Coming around, and I looked at the finish line. And I said, "Wow, I'm the first person from Verrazano Bridge to here."
Amazing.
So of course, across the line, and I remember, and I went down on my knees and kissed the ground and I said, I was here this time last year saying I'll be back.
Yeah, and here you were. You'll be back, and did that change your life? Like, to win New York's just pretty, next level, really.
It put the disappointment of 76 into perspective. The disappointment of the 1980 boycott, it put that, and I realized, and Marion, my mother, had said that sometimes things won't happen the way you want them. Sometimes you're wanting this, but your time will come at another point or another time. And I realized then what she was saying when I had won New York, that was my defining moment. It just took longer than other people.
Yeah. Wow. It's a pretty big defining moment. Not many people get to have a life like you've led, Rod. And, I do feel like we probably need a bit of a second session because we haven't even got onto the work that you've done, which is, I really want to share about the Kids Marathon Project and all the other stuff, the couch, what's the name of it? The couch program that you had. And
the couch to the finish line,
yeah, that's the one, and to share a little bit of that and the work that you've been doing since then, because I think that would be an important topic in themselves. But we're going to have to wrap it up for today. I've got a mum out there who's like banging around, giving me signs that I need to go and take her out. So get her to her training. So, Rod, thank you so much for your time today, for your insights, your wisdom, and sharing such an exciting ride. I think the listeners have been going up on the up and downs with you the whole way. And say hi to your amazing brother, John. I think what an incredible person to do all that with you. So thanks very much, Rod, for
Thank you for your inspiration to me too, by the way.
I haven't done anything.
Yes, you have. I can feel it. I can sense it straight away.
It's amazing, very, very different athletes with very, very different skill sets and very different genetics, but we both love running and we both understand the power of running to change the world. Yes. And I think we can probably very much align on that.
Absolutely we do, Lisa. And thank you for your time. And I've enjoyed every second. Thanks, Rod.